Hi, and welcome back to this week's edition of Crosshairs, the program at ThePrint where we discuss the big national security or regional security story of the week. I'm Praveen Swami. I'm National Security Editor of ThePrint, and I'm joined today by Kanishk Gaur, a cybersecurity expert, and my colleague Suchet Singh, who's done a fantastic story this week on the Internet of Things. Suchet's story points out that many of the smart devices we're letting into our homes, smart TVs, smart fridges, smart washing machines, smart hot water geysers, are all embedded with sensors and chips that come out of China. And there's growing concerns across the world about the possibility that these chips might be giving Chinese intelligence a back door into our homes across the world. Countries are cracking down, but India still seems a bit behind the curve. My first question, Suchet, would be to you. When you were doing this story, how aware did you find the security services, the defense services were about the threat, and what, if anything, were they planning to do about it?
So to an extent related to software, everybody was software and applications. Everybody was sort of on the board, and they said we have designated lists of Chinese applications, etc., which are banned, which cannot be used, which have implications for data being taken, exfiltrated, which have implications for geospatial location and things like that. On hardware and on these smart devices, it was a bit ambiguous, but the response we largely got was that in official places, official capacities, tactical areas, and so on, all these smart devices, etc., are not allowed. But what seemed to emerge as a gap or a lacuna was, say, a security official's private home. Now, these devices, specifically the smart ones, are excessively employed at home as well. So there was a bit of ambiguity there, which I guess in time will get clear, but as of now, it seems to be an ambiguity. But when it comes to the office spaces and official capacities, it seems that the ball has started rolling on how to offset any possible Chinese threats.
But there's still, correct me if I'm wrong, but still, unlike in the United States,
Yeah.
no ban on Chinese companies selling these gadgets. Would that be broadly correct?
So I think there's no outright ban on Chinese telecommunication and video surveillance equipment, but I think there is a complete ban on the apps. So I guess the assumption is that in time it will reach this, but I don't think there is, as of my knowledge, there's not a clear ban as of now.
Kanishk, I'm struggling to understand this as someone who doesn't use smart gadgets of any kind if I can possibly avoid it. But does this basically mean that our, audio speakers or our fridges might be spying on our private lives and passing on that information? Can you talk us through this a little bit? What the actual risk is and how it works?
No, absolutely. That's a real-time possibility. If you would have heard, there was this app which came on Android Play Store some time back, and that app would showcase how would you look when you grow old. And a lot of people downloaded that app to look at how they would be. What they did not realize was that app was actually stealing all your data. That app was stealing away your personal information. And millions of people downloaded that app and lost tremendous amount of data. Now that's just one app which became popular, right? And there are so many other apps which are there, which you use today for controlling devices. If you have cameras installed at your home, fortunately or unfortunately, many of these would be from Chinese manufacturers. And these Chinese manufacturers would want you to upgrade to a latest version. They would want you to upgrade to a new control which they have built in. There'll always be those elements. Now, as part of this process, there could also be an element where they might push a backdoor, which you will never be aware of. And you shouldn't be aware of. It's the job of national security agencies, it's the job of the government. But that's the huge risk that you carry today. If you look at India's CCTVs program, where you're installing cameras all across the country, you would look at majority of the companies which were earlier supplying cameras were Chinese companies, which included companies like Hikvision, Dahua brands. These companies are from China. They use software which is in China. While you are doing recording, the upgrade the command and control server is still sitting in China. So a very clear possibility is that somebody who has a large television screen or a large setup would actually be viewing what's happening in New Delhi or wherever else these cameras are set up. And at the same time, if you've got smart devices which are manufactured or are using systems which have Chinese IoT devices or sensors, for an upgrade, that might be also pushing back data. So those are real-time threats. So today you don't need a physical weapon to attack somebody or cause a disaster. All you need is these sensors where somebody can just manipulate and create a security risk for an individual and also for national security.
So, Kanishk, I'll come back in a minute to what we can do to protect ourselves. But in the conversations you've had with policymakers, with people in national security on this threat, given that most are from an older generation of people like me who are not necessarily very tech savvy, how aware do you find them on this problem? And linked to that, how much do they understand the need to develop a secure and resilient ecosystem, including chips and sensors which don't come from China?
So if I talk about certain cybersecurity regulators, they are aware about these risks. And that's primarily a reason that we decided that we will not allow any Chinese company to be a part of the 5G auction. And we had a 5G auction where there were alternates to these Chinese companies. Earlier, there used to be a debate saying, okay, there's no way we could manage our infrastructure without these companies. But then you had companies like Huawei and ZTE and others which were completely kept out. So yes, there is emphasis, there is understanding of the risk that some of these companies bring in, but you just can't take them out and say you're shutting them off. You will have to create alternates. And that is currently what the government is doing right now. We have done it in 5G, but it is required to be done in other setups, specifically programs like Smart City, CCTNS programs, programs which involve a lot of sensors, IoT-based systems. So eventually we'll have to create these policies, roll out, and have alternates to be there.
And presumably that would take a fairly large amount of support from the government for Indian industry, Indian technology. So big challenge. Would that be correct?
Yeah, so we are a very large economy. We're the world's third largest economy today, in terms of size and scale. So we'll have to prioritize. We'll have to look at sectors which can get maximum hit. So if you look at in India, there are 6 critical sectors: banking and financial services, telecom, transportation, oil and gas, the strategic sector, transportation and logistics, and the other sectors which are there, healthcare, it's still not a critical infrastructure. So you'll have to prioritize and look at these sectors and look at what is the kind of risk if a cyber attack happens on some of these sectors. Can it result in any disaster, national security risk, or impact the citizens of India? And then look at some of the other sectors to safeguard. And also look at the dependence of these sectors with respect to IoT and OT. If you look at telecom sector, it has a huge ramification with respect to IoT and OT. If you look at transportation sector, it has huge ramifications. So we'll have to build up a strategy of ultimately, getting away from Chinese equipments and building up our own competence and also having strategic partnerships with countries which can manufacture IoT devices and also export. So we'll have to look at alternates.
Right. So, Chet, one of the fascinating things in your story was some of the almost, science fiction possibilities that come up. You've described, for example, an Israeli company which is able to use not only hack into CCTV surveillance at commercial premises, but actually change the stream from those CCTV cameras in real time. Pretty dystopian stuff.
Yeah, I think the company, as far as I remember, is called Toka, and they have this ability that they can hack into a surveillance footage, a CCTV feed, and then they can alter it in real time. So I think that has pretty considerable ramifications. I don't think their software or the usage of their equipment is widespread in India right now. But I think going back to the China question, Kanishk, I want to ask you, in a lot of the sort of research and conversations about IoT and smart products, what emerged was that from China, even if the software is not running on something which is built in, say, their country, the hardware and the sensors predominantly the data sensors are mainly Chinese in both smart products and other IoT sort of infrastructure. So, in what capacity does this create problems, and how does this create problems, if I could ask you this?
So there's a dependency. You could just introduce a backdoor, which would require data to go through a server which is set up in China. There could be a command and control setup which is set up and connected to Chinese infrastructure. One fine day, if you've got a war with China or situation gets tough, they might decide, okay, let's weaponize it in a way to use it against the Indian society or Indian government. You saw real-time examples of what happened in Maharashtra. We recently saw what happened in case of Tata Power. We also saw what happens in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. So these are real-time threats. When you've got situations which are getting tough in Ladakh, you know, if China decides to teach India a lesson in an alternate way, those are national security issues and risk. So we will have to build up supply chains and mechanisms of using alternates. Taiwan is a great country as an alternate. They manufacture a lot of chips. They manufacture a lot of IoT sensors and devices. Unfortunately, they don't have the land bank to set up those large factories as China does. But obviously, they can do it elsewhere. They can do it in India or they can do it elsewhere. So those are partnerships that we will have to build up. And also as part of Quad, we've got a new supply chain that could be created with the Quad group, Australia, Japan, right? Those are great partners through which you can look at creating new partnerships for manufacturing chips. You can use the US tech.
So, Kanishk, I just want to ask you. You said the government is alive and aware of the threat. And just a few weeks back, though, we saw the extraordinary spectacle of the chaos at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, which seems to have happened because this premier institution did not upgrade its antivirus and operating systems on time. That doesn't seem to speak well of the overall system-wide level of preparedness for the threat. Why are parts of the government and private sector so reluctant to step up to base? Is it just a question of costs, or is there an issue of awareness there as well?
So I think it's primarily an issue of awareness. If you look at in India, there's a digital transformation which is happening. A lot of sectors are getting digitized. Hospitals are today using, hospital information management systems called as HIS. Your booking is done through Digital India programs such as the ORS program, where you can book government hospitals. Now, when these programs were designed, security was never a thought. Nobody thought cybersecurity.
Right.
And now you've started using these systems, and suddenly some threat pops up from somewhere saying, okay, there is a cybersecurity risk. So you're going back to the design phase. So what is currently lacking is something called as security by design, where security is there de facto when you're developing softwares or when you're creating processes or when you're creating systems. That is something which is lacking. So when we launched the Digital India program or when we're doing digital transformation, security has to be a part of it. That is a key learning. The other element is that some of these healthcare systems today don't regularly get audited by cybersecurity agencies, or even if they do, they will pick up a company which is doing it on L1, which is on bare minimum cost.
So that's the cheapest option available rather than the best.
Absolutely. So that's also a big issue. And unfortunately, this top institute of India, they did get a security assessment done from one of the service providers, but they decided not to fix up the systems, which required them to patch certain systems, upgrade certain systems. That wasn't done on a timely manner, right? For healthcare service provider, it's always about servicing customers or servicing patients. They never thought that something like this is going to hit them. But that's where you need to learn. Something of similar nature happened in England, in United Kingdom in 2017. They were hit by a ransomware called as WannaCry, and the entire system went down. And they had a major learning. They released advisories, and a similar situation has happened of that.
Sorry to cut you in there. Talking about what happened in England and the advisories they issued, and then going back to AIMS, what happened a few weeks ago. Contrasted with this whole Digital India program and so many sectors being digitized, do you think it's time that the national cybersecurity policy takes shape, so that at least there are a bunch of rules, regulations, standards that all these government departments, institutions can then follow, and perhaps would be easier to offset such situations.
Absolutely. It's high time we have a national cybersecurity strategy. So there is currently a draft sitting with the National Security Council Secretariat, which is pending the Prime Minister's approval. It's high time that comes out and that is being implemented on ground, because the implementation will require large amount of budgets. It will also require coordination between various government departments and also involvement of private industry, because anything that government brings in, if industry is not aligned to implement it in the right way, then it's a no-go.
And so just before we move ahead, I'd like to share some data while doing this report and generally reading. What I found was that talking about the IoT and smart products industry, in the second quarter of 2022, there was a 264% increase in the IoT market in India. Projections are that for 2023, this smart products market will reach $1.1 billion, which is, I think, a big jump from the current total turnover for this year. So the way the industry is moving and the way the sales of these products are going, I think the quicker the government moves the needle on these policies will then help deter any such future.
And a lot of this stuff is coming from China, right? Or with components from China, basically because they're cheap. Would that be correct?
I think Kanishk might have more insights on this. Is China dominating this industry because they have the technology, or is it because they produce the cheapest equipment?
It's basically the supply line. China has the largest supply line for IoT, not just in India but globally. They became the alternates for expensive technology, which was produced by some of the other players, Alcatel, Lucent, Nokia, Siemens, right? Those were the companies they were competing, and they were offering up to 90-95% discounts. So they have a huge supply line, and that not only supplies to India, but to the rest of the globe. And now when we realize that these are some of these issues that we face, and this is the dependence, then you have to look at alternates. And those alternates don't come so easily. They come with a cost. They also come with time. So we'll have to have a strategy, and we'll have to work really hard to build up the supply lines, which are beyond China.
A final question for you, Kanishk. I mean, you've talked about WannaCry. There've been a number of other instances, the SolarWinds attack, a number of cases where there've been reports of the Chinese government actually working hand in glove with hacking cartels or criminal hackers, and systematically using the cyber world, or the criminal end of the cyber world, excuse me, to exploit vulnerabilities in its adversaries. Is there anything that we really need to be doing as consumers? I mean, forget governments, but doing as consumers to protect ourselves? Or are we defenseless in the face of such a powerful and dedicated adversary?
So I think we need to learn to defend ourselves digitally. Where we talk about defending ourselves physically from physical security threats, we also need to safeguard our digital identity and assume at the same time that whatever comes to you in forms of news or information might not be real. An app that is giving you a free getaway might be actually be using for stealing your identity. So there's something called as digital literacy, which needs to be improved. We've talked about digital, you've talked about other literacy programs which are done, but when we are giving access to internet, not just to children or to general population, but also elderly, it's very important to you give them some amount of awareness. And that's the exact reason some of these loan scan apps are happening in India. And they're not happening from India, they're happening from outside India because people are not aware.
So one amazing little factoid I saw in your report was that many of these surveillance cameras, home surveillance cameras, and so on, offer hackers a gateway into our domestic networks, simply because people can't be bothered changing the default passwords on these devices or their routers. So that was a little sobering for me, because I have to confess I'm also pretty careless.
Yeah, I think it with the software upgrades and the backdoors Kanishk has been talking about, it seems like it's like a minefield literally for these sort of hackers and agencies to exploit. Now, is it a double-edged sword with software upgrades, Kanish? That say you have this CCTV at home and you're wanting to upgrade it, could that upgrade also lead to a backdoor for somebody
That's
to?
purely depends on which is the service provider that you're using. The L1 concept can get you into trouble. The other part is a lot of these suppliers who are there, they might get hacked. So like, your colleague mentioned in case of SolarWinds, it was not the major service provider, but a third party who was doing it. So for example, who's managing an camera systems for a particular government in Delhi. If they decide not to change passwords for cameras they have put all across Delhi NCR, those are going to be default cameras, which will have default passwords, which were set up and given by the company. So they don't even have to, look for anything. They already know what's lying there. So it's like live broadcast of IPL, which is happening free of cost.
Right. Well, terrifying thought, and I'll give you the closing
Just a
question.
final question, Kanish, before we go. So we were talking about how China dominates this smart products and IoT landscape vis-a-vis manufacturing, the sensors. They have the R&D, the technology, the capacity. Do you see any way in sort of India's Make in India program or other incentives to try and offset this, perhaps with the Quad? Is there any route to that, or this is a long, long stretch?
No, I think there's definitely a route to it. One, we need to enhance our digital literacy. We'll have to build up partnerships where we can manufacture these technologies in India or have partnership with nations who are already manufacturing it and exporting it at large scale. The other element is that we'll have to bring in security as part of design. We don't assume any system to be, foolproof, secure, and trust them. So building out the element of trust is another element that we'll have to look at. The third element is going to be data protection. Everybody wants to monetize India's data, and it is your and mine data. So how do you take care of security? Trust and privacy is going to be a very, very important element, with India being one of the largest democracies in the world.
Trust and privacy. So thank you, Suchet, for a fantastic story and joining us. Thank you, Kanishk, for making the time to speak with us today. And thank you all for joining this episode of Crosshairs. Look forward to being back with you next week.